Okay, right. Good afternoon, Clive. How are you doing?
I'm good, Graham, as always. Yourself?
I'm very good, thank you. This is our latest session of Five with Clive and guests. We've got two guests today, Clive.
We have. Well, we're taking this a slightly different direction, aren't we, Graham? Which is Five with Clive and Friends, shall we call it?
Right.
Yeah. So we've got some of our colleagues, two of our colleagues from the BWA Committee on board, Brian Davis and Jim Carberry. So welcome to you guys this afternoon. So yeah, we wanted to just expand the conversation, and particularly the recent webinar we've done on alcohol duty free, Graham, and just not to get my perception on things and my experience, but also but just to widen that and bring in both Brian and Jim, who have got a wealth of experience in operating in this arena. So it's give our members some insight into their thoughts as regards to how we, as the Bonded Warehouse Keepers Association and our members, seek to, one, recognise fraud, and two, how can we support driving that out of the supply chain? So it's great to have them with us this afternoon. So we'll kind of hand over back to you, Graham, and try and pose a question to us, all three of us, basically, and then just see where the conversation leads.
Yeah, so absolutely
Right.
right.
Can I
So
just
26th
ask,
of January.
have you, before we start this, have you actually done a risk assessment on having me and Jim on this call?
Good question, Brian.
No, I'm sorry,
okay.
Brian.
Okay, good. Let's do this.
I feel I will be editing this video. Yeah, so the 26th of January, we were joined by Gary Lampon from HMRC, who's part of the organised crime operations in their fraud investigation service. That's a bit of a mouthful. But yeah, it'd be good to get the feedback from Brian and Jim and yourself, Clive, as to how you thought the alcohol duty fraud webinar went, and really what people can do out there to avoid any sort of duty fraud or challenges in their supply chains and businesses.
Okay, great. Yeah, it'd be great to get Brian's and Jim's. Maybe Brian first in terms of a response to that.
Yeah. I mean, I think what was positive, Graham, on that webinar was the amount of attendees. I mean, I think there was over 80 attending the webinar, which is amazing. And it just shows you, I think, our members' concerns about duty fraud in the marketplace at the moment. I think Gary put across very well. I think there's a misconception by some trade associations that post-Brexit and post-EMCS to Europe, the duty fraud is no longer the issue it was. And I think Gary put across very well that duty fraud is as big as ever. And I think it's just changing in the dynamics of it. And he showed to us that they now use the routes of goods going through Southern Ireland. So I think, and with the Windsor framework and all the rest of it, I think the forces always pick up a weak link in that chain. And as we all know now, the Ireland is a very weak link in the chain because it's not working very well and not being managed very well by the government as such. But yeah, no, I think it was very positive. I think it made us realise that whilst some people trundle along and think it's not so much of a problem, I think it's made us realise that we need to all up our game as members of the BWA, as representing warehouse keepers in our due diligence processes, and not just sit back and think the world is okay and we haven't got the problem that we used to have with our customers. And I think that's one of the big things is the customers we have. They are the potential risk to us as third-party warehouse keepers of where fraud can happen. And I think what we've got to do is be very vigilant on still taking on new business, making sure we follow due diligence. I think the other thing we've got to, as an association, stand up against at the moment, there's talk about getting rid of WALGA and getting rid of duty stamps. I think WALGA is one of our key checks for due diligence as a company and as a trade association. Getting rid of that puts the onus back on us as warehouse keepers to do more due diligence than we've done so far. And again, I think duty stamps is another one that Gary made clear that it's still very relevant to in the fight against duty fraud. So I think really it came across well that we've got to set ourselves up and realise that fraud is still there, and we need to be as vigilant as ever as members of the BWA to take the risk away from ourselves.
No. I think you're right. I mean, Jim, your views. I mean, having been in industry as long as you have.
Well, I thought the presentation was very good, and to echo Brian's comments, particularly on Ireland, I think what was emphasised is that people are looking. The fraudsters effectively are very, very inventive. Because one door closes, they'll find another door to open up and use. And I remember years ago, pre-EU, having an export of vodka to the Republic of Ireland, which was going through Northern Ireland. And we, as a third-party warehouse keeper, received back an endorsed C88, or the equivalent of it then, stamped up by the border authorities, customs and excise, etc. And there'd been coercion, bribery, threats, the lot. That was how that was produced. So what goes around comes around. We seem to be back. I'm not saying that particular type of operations taking place, but I'm not surprised that there's still fraud coming out of Ireland. The other part of it, which I don't think Gary could get down to, is that if you're a 3PL warehouse keeper, you live in a different fraud environment than if you are a manufacturing warehouse keeper, i.e. you're a distiller or a brewer. It's a whole different environment, and the dangers for the 3PL, and that's really all I can speak to, are very often most dangerous person can be your customer. So we come back to due diligence. You have to make sure that you have assessed your customer. If somebody comes to you and they say they want to use a bonded warehouse for their business, but they don't have a movement guarantee, they don't have a deferment facility, not VAT registered, you really should be politely telling them, they don't need a bonded warehouse, they need something else. So it's self-awareness. It's the customers have to be very, very aware, and that's I think that came through with Gary. I think he mentioned that. I remember receiving a consignment from a distiller. This was back again pre-Brexit, when we were first bringing in when we started to remove officers from the warehouse environment, and we received a consignment of whiskey in from a reputable company. But the person who owned it was wrapping it down. He was closing it up, and we brought the whiskey in. And a member of staff happened to break a case, and it turned out that we had received a couple of thousand cases of caramel-coloured water. So what that particular individual had done is he'd taken advantage of the fact he was closing down his business, had removed any distilled whiskey, bottled distilled whiskey, out, sold it, hadn't paid any excise duty, and had raised the equivalent of an under-bond removal document, which is the MCS entry nowadays, and bottled some water and sent the water to us. The fraudster can be very, very clever, and it's not like saying I did due diligence when we took them on. It's daily. I'm not saying you should be looking at your customers, but your procedures, your staff should be trained to pick up on things. If they're being asked to maybe do something, that they should be trained. Look, always trust your instincts. If you're not sure, take it up the line a bit and get a bit of advice. So
good advice, actually. And we're saying as an association, are we not, to our customers, that they our members, and that they must have a due diligence policy, they must enact that policy, and therefore everybody that touches that product must have sight or understanding of those due diligence processes. So right from onboarding the customer to engaging with the customer to transacting with that customer, and it's just not a one-off check and validation, which is what you've just mentioned. It should be ongoing, should it not, Brian? When we're trading with these customers, we should be making periodic checks on them and their supply chain, and checking if anything's changed in that supply chain.
I think, to picking up on your point there, Clive, it's not so much periodic checks, it's knowing when there's a change in the operating model of that customer. That, you know, suddenly they might be doing some wine movements and so on, and then suddenly, you know, you get some loads of beer coming in, and then they're wanting to export these beers, and because they are an existing customer, you know, it may be that customer you've had for many years has got new owners of the business, and suddenly they've bought that company with a view to carrying out a fraud by exporting beer. And so it can be a long-standing customer that suddenly changes the way they operate, and you need, you know, the staff need to be aware of this and pick up on it. And you know, as Jim says, take it up the line, and somebody does something about it. But
I think it's also worth mentioning that the customer can be a victim of fraud. I've seen that on occasions. The customer's not necessarily, although they're using a bonded environment for storing their goods, etc., they're not necessarily as familiar with notices 196 and 197 as the people who are operating the warehouses are, and they can get caught out. You know, I've seen customers who have been asked, and they've used a movement guarantee, and the goods have just been diverted as soon as they've gone out the door. You know, whereas the warehouse keeper is acting on the instructions that they receive from the customer. And those instructions could appear to be very valid.
And that's another
line.
That's another really good point.
It gets diverted.
So. It's a really good point, because anyways, we're saying you're just not checking out your customer, but your customer's customer. So that supply chain, we need to have as warehouse keepers, you need to have visibility of the whole supply chain, start to finish, A to Z, and who's in that, and that covers that point actually really well, Jim. Is that it may be your customer subjected to fraud, therefore we need visibility of the whole supply chain to actually be really comfortable with that as a warehouse keeper, and maybe identify for our customer that there may be an issue in their own supply chain. So I think that's invaluable. I think that's a great comment, and something we should absolutely be considerate.
Well, on that point, I mean, one thing that you see on occasions is that our customer may sell goods to an end customer, and then what you have is they say, look, we want to buy your goods, we want to export it to wherever country it is in Europe, but what we'll do, we'll use our nominated freight forwarder to move these goods. So therefore, our customer sits back and thinks, great, you know, I'm going to get paid for the goods. I haven't got to worry about moving the goods because the end customer is going to, you know, cover that movement. And then that's where, you know, they'll use an agent who doesn't understand at all the procedures for moving alcohol duty suspended. And again, that's where a fraud can take place. And of course, you know, there's a classic term being used many, many years ago by our dear friend John Batchelor, is that the warehouse keeper is the tethered goat. So when it goes wrong, you know, unfortunately, the warehouse keeper is the first in the firing line to get it from any authority. So, you know, it's one thing to say, oh, well, we're using somebody else's guarantee. But, you know, I've got first-hand experience at the moment of goods going to Germany under movement guarantees for other companies. And yet the authorities in Germany have come back to my company to say there's been a shortage and we're not interested in the guarantee. We're going after you as the warehouse keeper. And, you know, you argue, you send them the information from EU law at the time. This was back in 2019, and they're just not interested. And they say, we're not interested. It's been a loss. We hold you, the warehouse keeper, responsible, and therefore we're going to go after you. So, you know,
that's very interesting, Brian, because I know one warehouse keeper who's acting for a large distiller. And it's one of the outputs of Brexit. Now, if you're sending goods to a member EU state, you're no longer sending goods to the EU, you're possibly transiting to one or two other EU member states. Documentation has to be raised at every transit point, and the freight forwarder failed in that instance. And the local authority in the country of destination are not going after the company selling the goods, they're going after the warehouse keeper.
Exactly.
Now, the warehouse keeper my opinion, should just stand his ground and whatever. But they are talking about fines, possible imprisonment, and all that sort of stuff. And inviting them over to present themselves, which are not going to do.
But picking up on
that you inadvertently can end up in the middle of a very, very messy scenario.
Yeah. I mean, picking up on your point there, I was dealing with German customs authorities back in 2019. In 2023, the debt recovery unit in customs in the UK contacted me and said, we've been contacted by German customs. These charges are still outstanding. You've got to pay us, or we'll deem you as being not a compliant warehouse keeper because you haven't followed the procedure. And then when I go back to the debt recovery unit and say, look, this is why we've disputed this, the view is, well, we're not really interested in the detail. We're just a debt recovery unit. So you either pay the money or you get the German authorities to back off. And what I found is nobody in HMRC that will support the warehouse keeper in these instances to fight the fight. So you end up with a case, as I am at the moment, if you have a choice, if you either pay the charge, which has been something ongoing for the last 4 or 5 years, or you think of another route, but nobody in customs really wants to take these things up.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on that we need to be aware of as such. But I think really, as a trade association and with the members we have, it's really, I think, trying to highlight to them the importance of due diligence, the importance of looking out for duty fraud. I think it's important that we every 6 months, Gary's offered us to have a webinar every 6 months to update us on the latest fraud that he believes is going on, which would be great for us because, as he says, fraud is changing all the time. So I think if Graham can facilitate that, and we have these 6 monthly meetings, and we have the attendance we had a couple of weeks ago, and then I would suggest that our members, on the back of that, depending on what Gary says, they just revisit their due diligence procedures and adopt and change them. And if customs want to come in and question your due diligence, you can say, well, we're doing it on the back of these webinars that we've arranged with Gary Lampon for the fraud unit. And I don't see, to me, that's an absolute positive that we're working directly with the duty fraud team in customs to make sure we've got the best and latest information available to us to protect ourselves as warehouse keepers.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've already agreed. I think we've already got a date in the diary, haven't we, Graham, with Gary to do exactly that. So we'll definitely have that session with him, and we'll share the output of that as well. And maybe, as you say, and the likelihood actually through that, Brian, is another session on kind of an update in terms of how fraud has changed, and it is constantly changing. We know we've now got transit fraud. Inward diversion is less common now. It was really common pre EU exit. We now have that's been replaced by transit. We continue to have outward diversion, definitely. So, I mean, it'd be great to keep, and we will keep a close relationship with him and his team, and we'll relay the output of those discussions, and obviously hope to have webinars reflecting and discussing those changes in the duty fraud going forward. So, and as you rightly said, that was a great attendance last week. So there clearly is, we've tapped into a vein that we need to keep obviously tapping into and relaying the information that we get from HMRC. So we're not going to let this drop. As other trade associations you refer to consider duty fraud does not exist. Well, we all know it absolutely does exist, and we need to keep tabs on how that mutates going forward. Definitely, definitely. Graham, back to you. I think we've run, as usual, run over our 5 minutes with Clive, but I think that's been a great conversation with the guys. So,
I think that's been good. That's actually been about 17 minutes, I think. So
that's what happens.
That's got to be a record.
That's what happens when you invite 2 old people to join.
That's what happens. We don't know how to.
Knowledgeable people.
Yeah. I had one last black hole, and it's just while
see what happens, Clive.
And that is sales and warehouse. Whereby if a warehouse keeper has to be very, very rigorous in that, or they can end up mired in all sorts of things. And what happens is that if a customer sells something to someone in your warehouse, and that sale takes place, you then have a new customer that you haven't had a chance to do any due diligence on, you haven't had a chance to do anything on. So if you don't follow the rigours and have it as part of your pre-contract or part of your contract, you cannot sell anything in the warehouse to another customer without us having agreed to it, and number two, without us having signed off on the change of ownership certificate. There's got to be a DOA. You've got to have very, very strict procedures there, but it is one to watch. It is one to watch.
Great point. Great point. Great point. Okay, Graham, I think we will draw it to a close, given that we're now into our 18th minute, I think, from what you say.
Well, I thought you had finished when you started that, sorry.
No.
That's great.
Well, that's been really good. Yeah, but Graham, I think we'll do this again. I think that's been really good. The discussion's been really good. Hopefully, our audience and members find that insight really useful and helpful, which I'm sure they will. So big thanks to Brian. Big thanks to Jim. Just hand back to you for closing the session, Graham.
Yeah, thank you very much. So just to finish off, the recording of that duty fraud webinar is available on the website. So anyone who's listening, go and have a look. Our next webinar coming up is to do with alcohol destructions and recycling. That's on the 28th of February. So there's information about that on the website too, and I'll put a link with this. But yeah, thanks to everyone for attending, and we'll see you on the next one.
Absolutely. Thanks, Graham. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Jim. Really good.
Thank you.
See you soon.